Hi everyone, so my name is Emre Deniz and I'm here to do a talk called Tackling the Fear, Entrepreneurship in Games. Before I start though, I want to kind of get a sense for the room here. So who is running their own kind of indie or games or even like a tech business or any type of collective that is trying to, make some sort of revenue from doing this? Right, so most of us, and who's looking to get into that in the future? Okay, great. And who's working in emerging technologies like AR, VR, mixed reality? Okay, so that's good as well. VR market's not totally dead. You haven't all fled and ran away. And who's looking to try and essentially create companies that work in both games and technology? Great, okay, so still relevant. That doesn't work, great. Does that work? Bear with me for 1 second. Right, okay, so my name is Emre Deniz. I'm the CEO of Opaque Space. Opaque Space, for those of you that know or don't know, is a company that builds both games as well as technology, and we're currently working on a number of astronautical training programs in aerospace and aviation, as well as working on virtual reality titles as well for entertainment purposes, such as Earthlight. We've been building some great stuff, but I wanted to talk to you about the journey that led us to go from a one-person studio that was actually at Games Week last year getting ready to pitch to accelerators and to seek seed investment, to having a team of like, what are we now? Jenny, what are we? 6 developers that are working on a range of different projects and are able to kind of, really move forward at a very rapid pace, but do it in a very healthy way as well. Okay, so tick. Yeah, that worked well. So we started at October 2016 last year, and the intent was that I was actually sitting in one of the little cushion, the sofas out at Games Week at this very building, talking with HDC for the ViveX Accelerator program, trying to pitch them a game studio to try and resurrect essentially a project that we'd been working on, which was called Earthlight, that had hit the rocks in 2016. And now we have a small team and we have a good gig going, right? But I want to talk to you about all the stuff that went wrong so that those of you that are interested in building your own businesses will not have to make these costly mistakes that can often be quite fatal. So, you're here because you want to know the truth about business development in technology and games as well. And we have a lot of people kind of walking in right now, so I'm going to try and give them just a second to sit. And I'm here to share with you a talk that is both quite personal to me, but also is constructed around a lot of the lessons that we've learned in both raising capital, approaching business development, as well as developing the culture of a team that's able to very rapidly develop content and technology without doing a lot of the kind of the tropes of technology and game startups, which is the crunch, which is to be scrappy and hustle and whatnot. And those are all terminologies that I really, really hate. Okay, so essentially one of the things that happened that we want to kind of talk about is, as we all know, we created a studio that was built around creating games and creating virtual reality games. And we hit at this year an interesting kind of pivot in the market, and I'm going to talk to you about that. Well, the first thing that we want to talk to you is essentially talk to you about how we secured capital and resources. Just give me 1 sec, there's still people coming in. Yep. And the first thing that we're going to do is talk to you about the venture. And I'm going to loop it all the way back, this whole ripple effect thing, back to how I'm able to stand here today and talk about our beginnings and then our end. So last year, we wanted to start a studio, and we pitched and we asked for money. We asked for money that would allow us to build our game, and money that would allow us to build technologies, and money that would allow us to scale. And the thing is, seeking money and investment money to build a game is actually a really ridiculous concept, because we pitched a game about training astronauts so that we can build a company that would one day go and train astronauts. And if you're someone who's looking at in financial investment, that sounds like a really crazy idea. And it wasn't it's not a big deal. We kind of said, hey, give us 6 figures worth of money, and we're going to go and build you a company that's going to train astronauts in virtual reality. And then said, what are your qualifications? And we said, we're just game developers who kind of did that for a little bit in 2016. And we quickly realized some very hard lessons in regards to the feedback that we got. And this is important things for those of you that are looking at investment, looking at startup capital and seed funding as well, which is the first lesson. You'd kind of want to pitch a business that you think you would invest in yourself. So the way that we approached games and seeking funding for games was that we didn't actually really pitch a games company. We pitched the intersection of technology and content in order to exploit essentially problems and gaps in the market that we identified. And the thing is that we very quickly realized that this can actually just mean games. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that as well. But essentially, we had to pitch a team, we had to pitch a studio, we had to pitch an idea, we had to pitch how we would defend that idea and how we would scale that idea, and then we had to pitch a roadmap. And this is still applicable to games as well. And yeah, so the original pitch that we did, and we asked for money, it went through 5 months of iterations and 5 months of development time. So originally it was called Opaque Games, and then it was called Opaque X, and then it became Opaque Space. Originally we pitched a company that would build both games and enterprise content. Then we pitched a company that would build games, technology and research and development. And then we pitched a company that would work on Earthlight as a long form kind of experience, whilst somehow developing technologies that would scale up to everything from training teachers to training nurses to everything in between. And at the end, we actually just pitched an arcade game and said, give us the money and we'll make a really good arcade game and you can roll it out to your markets, and then we kind of see what happens from there. And to illustrate this really well to you in terms of a business development roadmap, this is actually a slide from the original pitch deck that we sent to HDC when we were accepted for the ViveX Accelerator program. And as you can see, we've kind of knocked off 2 of these kind of goals that we set out to do. But this is crazy, like when you pitch something like this to an investor and you say, I'm gonna, from Australia in Melbourne, from a tiny little studio in Glenferrie Hawthorne, we're gonna build you an astronautical training program as an idea. And to date, we were the most highly valued ViveX Accelerator program investment, and that's been really great. But there is a formula that we had to approach here, and this all happened from 5 months of learning. So when we first kind of pitched this thing, and the reason it took 5 months is because we had very little guidance when we were going into it. And I'm gonna share with you some of those things. So when you're pitching an idea, you're essentially, even if it's a game, right? The idea is that you're pitching an intellectual property, and you're pitching a brand, and you're pitching a solution to a problem. And that problem can be a lack of demographic. Like maybe there is a lack of ARPG, mobile retro, cyberpunk titles in terms of a market gap, and you're pitching a solution to that. Or maybe you're pitching some sort of an analytics tool, or you're pitching a new way for 2 mobile devices to connect. The idea is that you're essentially pitching a solution to a problem, and you're asking for a bunch of money. And you have to keep in mind that when you're asking for something like money, in terms of when you're raising capital or when you're searching for resources, money is only worth what you can access, and that can be salaries for your developers, or it can be networks. But in our experience, we actually found that being able to have large-scale partners that would give us face-to-face time with very large-scale kind of companies and industries and things like that was worth more than the money that we were provided. And those of you that are entrepreneurs or games entrepreneurs, that is going to be something that you have to factor in as well. And defensibility was one that I never really thought about this, right? Like, how do you defend your idea? You may come up with the best game idea or the best technology idea, and it may sound great to you and it may sound great to investors, but they're going to ask you, what makes you so special in that equation, or what makes you able to do this that other people can't? And the reason they ask that is because it really matters in a roadmap when you become popular, or when someone covers you in an article and they want to talk about your idea. So an idea is actually worthless, right? You're pitching an opportunity. So the solution to the problem that you're talking about is actually an opportunity and an exploitation. And that can mean that you're essentially looking to build a strategy game, for example, in a market that has had a weak kind of title showing for a year, and you think that you've identified the demographics. The other one is obviously that's a lack of an existing solution, and that feeds into defensibility. And I think that's a key thing that we really learned. So in our fundraising attempts and the discussions that we had in seed capital, we got asked the question, why you? You know, why can't another big company go and do the thing that you want to do, basically? And why can they do it better than you can? And we had to really leverage our team and really talk about how we were special and we were unique and things like that. And, you know, it was an interesting question for us to have to answer. And it's one that you have to answer when you come up with an idea. Next. So, this, I like this bit, right? Because they told me that it was going to be as simple as you pitch, you deliver the pitch, and then you get the bags of money and you run away and everything's happily ever after. And it really wasn't, turns out. It turns out it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because actually, there is, this is a summarized list of the documents that you need to prepare in order to accept any type of outside capital. And this can include things like publisher deals, for example. Like you need to prepare a lot of documentation. And now, for the next 35 minutes, I'm going to go and read out every single one of these, so bear with me. We've got 48. Not really, because I like you all, and I'm not here to hurt anyone. But you know, this is something that I would advise you to take a photo of, because if you're looking for anything from outside capital to publisher deals, you're going to have to prepare. It does range from things as crazy as copies of your passport and driver's licenses to any detailed financial projections that your idea may have in both low, medium, and high projections as well. So then you do that and you go to raise money. And that sounds like it's a great idea. And then you have to play the numbers game. You contact 80 or 100 or 200 different VCs or funds or publishers, and then maybe 20 will get back to you. And you work down this pyramid. And the problem is that every single time, you have to hit it dead on. Like, there are key terminologies that can trigger someone to not even want to talk to you when you've just had a typo, for example. But that actually is a part of the venture kind of capital raising thing that we've had to undergo. So we approached a lot of it with essentially having an idea, and our idea was to make a game about training astronauts because we identified that there was a lack of virtual reality commercial programs that were training astronauts. This is crazy, I know. We had a team that has been already working in this field for the last 2 years in a collaboration with NASA, and the defensibility was that we had been invited to the Johnson Space Center several times, and we had done things that other companies had not been able to do yet, and it still wasn't enough. But we're going to talk about that later on in terms of our business development chapter. So, you've got the money, right? You've got the publisher deal or the money or the seed capital, whatever it may be, and you are now looking to hire a team. So with us, we got accepted into the accelerator program. We were given a good kind of capital deal, and we had to build a game in 3 months, which meant I had to go hire a team in 3 months, because at the time I actually did not have anyone that worked for me. So it was a great team of one, which was fun, and it went well. But there's a couple of mistakes and things that we learned along the way. So the biggest thing that I learned is that when you're doing key hiring, being honest to your team and being honest about your situation and being honest about your roadmaps are actually quite important things. So one of the things that I did during my hiring practices were I told people that I've got this much time, I've got to make a demo of a game in 3 months. If you're with me, you're with me, let's do this. And it's crazy, I know. And people, it was received well. Hiding things from your team is something that's always going to bite you in the butt. And whether that's an indie outfit or an R&D company or a technology kind of outfit, it's going to be the same deal. So your key personnel on the core team, and this is going to matter in the future, it needs to be built on vulnerability and admitting that you sometimes don't know what you're doing or that you have very limited resources. And this was very important. So we built a lot of the work that we did and the hiring that we did based on good culture practices. So you can train a junior, for example, and you can build up existing developers and kind of, I guess, teach them new skills, but you can't source control culture. And what that means is that when someone turns around and they break up the team unity, you can't get that back. And in a tight deadline with tight resources, that was really important to us. So we hired on culture before skill. Not to say that we didn't hire skilled people, but, you know, I got my designer looking at me in a bad way. We made sure to focus on this essential part because it was going to be a high-stress environment. And this is going to happen to you when you're working with a publisher deal, or you're working with seed capital, or you're working with just scaling up a small team. You have to focus on your culture, because a high-stress situation with a good cultured team is a challenge where you have locked shields, whereas the opposite is something that is just a nightmare to deal with. Opaque Space also did something a little bit different than other teams. We don't like the terms like hustle, scrappy, or being about skin in the game and things like that. We actually pay people the industry average for their salaries or what they do. And what that allows them to do is worry about what they're doing at work as opposed to paying their bills. You are going to get a lot of advice that tells you to do the opposite of that, to make the best that you can do and have everyone live in a little flat somewhere with some accelerator or something along those lines. And we advise against this, right? Because you're paying people to come up with products that you're going to sell to a market. You're not really kind of getting people to jump on board without to worry about their rent or their groceries, or they're worrying about their family lives, so they're making sacrifices. And what this does is that it allows you to build a business that you can scale up that's going to be healthy and sustainable, as opposed to having this vague promise down the track that you're going to change these practices that allowed you to build up after you have the resources. And this allows you to build trust around your company as well, and it puts the pressure of business development upstream as opposed to downstream. So what Opaque did was we paid everyone full salaries and gave them equity from day one, and then what that meant was that we're worrying about revenue generation at a very high level, as opposed to telling people, work harder, pump out this thing, let's crunch this thing out, because that cycle will never end and it'll burn you out. And then you'll get asked questions about how you're going to scale up and how you're going to retain a team that has culture like this as well. So we work 100% of the time. What's that thing? Yeah, 23.805% of the time. So we do a 40-hour week, but everyone works 100% of the time. We start our work day at 10 a.m., so no one really comes to work sleepy. We're pretty flexible about sick days. We're pretty understanding about the need to drop out of the office to do something, to run an errand. We try and support people with their legal problems or with their visa conditions if it rises. Essentially, what we're trying to do is build a workplace that people want to support, instead of one that seeks to exploit them in order to generate revenue or capital. And the reason we do that is because the number one question that I got asked the most when I was doing fundraising or talking to potential investors was about how I was going to keep my team. And a good workplace culture was the answer that was most solid, because many of your competitors or many of the other studios that you may encounter will not do this. The other one that was really great, and this is one that I credit my team for, is that I hired a lot of people in order to let go of my ego. Many of you that are looking to develop IPs, games, technology, you're going to have to face the fact that you're going to have to hire a team that will share credit with you. And that is a huge jump in ego, and you have to trust them to do their job. And if you have a good workplace culture, more often than not, you're going to find that people are trustworthy, and they're there to support that environment and build that environment as well, because it's a place they like coming to. If you exploit people, you're probably going to find that this advice is not going to be applicable for you as well. And it's about respect, I guess. So, how the hell do we build a business when virtual reality was dying, for example, as a consumer market? And you all know that, and we don't actually mince our words around this, that the consumer market in VR took a massive downturn this year because the hype wore off and people were looking at productive ways to apply the technology. And we're going to talk about this as well. So how do you build a business in the virtual reality winter when you're in the business of building virtual reality? Well, originally we were looking to build a game studio that was working in VR. And what we did was we rapidly looked at this eroding market, and this is about tackling the fear as well, in the sense that we did competitor analysis, market analysis, and went, yeah, the VR market is not looking too healthy right now, so what do? We looked at enterprise, and we looked at how we can offer parallel solutions to what we were building. So we're building a virtual reality game about X. And funnily enough, in my GCAP talk last year, I talked about how you're not just building a game, you're building a range of experiences and systems and kind of nuances around content delivery that can be replicated to things like training. And so what we did was we became really good at building content, but we also became really kind of niche in terms of providing astronautical training as a service, because that's a thing you do. And then we changed our company branding as well. So we talked about using a range of technology or platforms and building a range of experiences, and we became bespoke developers that were leveraging expertise that were unparalleled in terms of providing emerging technologies in aerospace, because that's a thing. And I want you to think about this in the sense that when you're tackling eroding market conditions and changing market conditions, sometimes changing the way that you describe yourself can make the difference between being seen as a part of a dying market and being seen as people that are able to pivot and be flexible in how they approach their markets and tap into multiple markets. So when someone says, do you run a VR company? I'm like, no, we do VR, AR, mixed reality, we do, hell, we even do some stuff on iPads, for example. But it just means that we're very solution-oriented as well. Because when you get stuck, it's not about the sinking down, and it's not about being, going under that you have to worry about. It's about not being able to move and not being able to be flexible. And we saw a lot of companies in 2016 and 2017 especially who are very focused on specific hardware platforms. And this can happen with consoles, happen with mobile phones, it can happen with iPad, like whatever deployment that you're doing, you have to think about being flexible and being able to react very rapidly to a change in the market. And that can include business models. So, do you go freemium? Do you go, I don't know, like premium kind of delivery? Do you create things that are very episodic? And it's up to you to be able to tackle that kind of market fear, look at something objectively and say, we need to make changes. And sometimes it can be as simple as being agnostic with your hardware platforms. But I just put hardware up there as a good example of how we made changes. So we're a HTC invested company, but we build everything agnostic for HMD, so it can work on anything. So that if something goes bad, we can keep moving. And this one's a really important one. So when you're looking to build a sustainable business and you're looking to create a lot of, profit margins, compromising on your quality is something that's going to bite you in the butt at some point. And remember, this also transports itself to everything that you do in terms of company culture, to how you manage your clients and relationships, to how you even deliver on promises. Be the best at what you can do, and that includes how you treat people and it includes how you treat your products as well. And for us, that has worked well so far, but it's also allowed us to kind of really carve out a niche and tell people that we are the best at what we do. And that has come at a cost, but it has been an investment as well. It's a forward investment, essentially. And this is a good one. So whenever you do a business plan or a projection, whenever you think you're going to get X amount of sales, repeatedly halve it, because as we found, for example, that it's not as easy as thinking you're going to get X money, or it's not as easy as convincing yourself that you have the best solution, or you have the best product, you have the best game, or the best idea, because what's going to happen is reality will hit you hard, which means that you need to make sure that you have contingencies. And something that really came to Opaque, for example, Opaque Space, was that we pitched an arcade game, then we pitched a series of technologies, and then we pitched a revenue sharing idea, then we pitched, we also had lined up project and client-based kind of services. We had also had lined up a number of enterprise contracts, and it became these huge lines of different contingencies so that we never really looked at one game or one thing and said, that's going to be our make or break point. And that's something that can apply to you. Even if you're just building a game or a game title, you may want to look at multiple methods of revenue generation or contingencies, because I can guarantee you that it's never going to go according to plan. And at Opaque, we've actually enacted every contingency across the board in order to keep operations and keep moving, basically. And it seemed like overkill back when things were rosy, and they seem like really good safety nets when things are not so rosy. Which brings us to the idea of not so rosy and the mistakes and fear that really hit. At NZGDC this year, I did a talk about the realities of business development, and A good example of that is that in order to run a team, your monthly burn rate can be anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 if you're paying full salaries. Now think about it like this, right? And how scary that sounds as a figure, that you have to pay $40,000 to every single month, regardless of if you make income or not, just to be able to keep operations. And if you don't, and if you ask people who work in their spare time or their part-time or they work 8 hours a week only, the changes in terms of figures of that from full-time to part-time development is completely different. So that caused a lot of fear, and I want to talk to you about how we had to learn from a lot of this stuff, because failure in business can be not just costly, but it can be quite fatal as well, and you tend to get only one or two mistakes before you're down for the count. This one's a really big one. Okay, so at July 2017, the team, 3 months of work, was able to create a really good arcade game as part of the Vivex program. And they did so even though that some of the members of the team were not even in the country and people were, interfacing through Skype. They did it with very shaky kind of project management tools, pretty shaky kind of Favreau. And somehow they delivered the project and it was great and everyone loved it and it was fantastic. It sounds good on paper, but the thing is, there is catastrophic failure risk in that entire equation. So the idea being that if something had gone wrong, the entire business would have collapsed and that would have been the end of it. And I implore all of you to look at your projects and look at your businesses and your business plan and look at what can kill you if something goes wrong. And for us, what happened was, if we failed to deliver on a single milestone or a schedule, Opaque Space would have been dead in the first 3 months of operation. And what could have stopped that? Having a producer. So we hired a producer. Even though we didn't, nothing went wrong, we looked at it and said, if we have a producer, this won't happen. And this catastrophic failure would not occur if we have someone in place who's able to manage our schedules, manage our workflows and our pipelines, and ensure that we deliver things on time. And it's very important for you to be objective and to tackle that fear of self-analysis head on and say, what could have killed me, instead of thinking, I am the best, I survived, and I delivered on my promises. Because eventually you'll hit something that you won't be able to recover from. And our producer's great. I'm not even so sure if she's in the room right now. She may be working. This was one that hit me pretty hard when I was going through building a company, was that when I was making a business plan, in my competitor on market analysis, I actually was looking at information and typing stuff on Google that would allow me to find the information to convince an investor. And what that meant was I was afraid of finding out the truth. I was afraid of finding a VR company that was doing a better job of making astronaut games, or doing a better, I was afraid of finding a VR company or emerging technology company that was already engaged in the work that we wanted to do. So I was trying to find all these articles and all this kind of lack of information that I could show an investor and say, hey, we have a great business model and it's defensible, because I was afraid of tackling the reality of what was happening. And what that does is it allows you to fool yourself and the people around you, but the real world doesn't care. And it can be very confronting to tackle this fear and to overcome it, and to actually look to see if your idea is good, to see if there's a market for it, to see if there's a problem that you're actually looking to overcome, and to even see if you have a good solution behind it and that it's defensible. And it's okay to be able to look at something and say, maybe I need to make changes. And that's what the previous chapters here in this talk were talking about. And that we looked at things and we tackled kind of these things and went, all right, we need to change the way that we're going. And you have to be decisive when you tackle that. Which, however, does cause a lot of stress, because what happened with me, for example, was that I almost burnt out a couple of times. And some of my colleagues here would know that what ends up happening is that there's a huge build-up that happens. And I implore you as business owners as well to manage your stress and to treat yourself as you would treat the people around you, including your employees, because stress is something that is very slow to build up. And it's something that can really cause your relationships, both professionally and in your personal life, to melt down, and it will impact your businesses as well. And you need to, it is a scary thing to be able to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm burning out, maybe I need to take some time. And for me, it was very hard and very scary to actually take steps back and take some rest as well. Because I think one of the really kind of horrifying things that has happened was that whilst I was starting to burn out, I became very mistrustful of the people around me. So the information coming in, I stopped trusting it. My employees or my colleagues, I was always mistrusting their work. You know, could we have done it better? Could we have solved this problem better? Or could we have, you know, did that person do as well as they could have with this specific situation? And that ranged from everything from your art pipelines to your technology. Even though I'm not a programmer, I was still questioning the work of my programmer because, you know, there's a lot of fear that builds up from stress and from just not being able to kind of nail down what is coming up in the future. And that is something that's going to hit you as well. And there's a mistake that's ingrained in that too. So you start seeing threats even in your resources. And when you have a business with lots of contingencies, lots of resources, you start seeing threats everywhere as well. This one was good. And the reason for that is because when you pay people to do a better job than you, and when you take a step back and you trust professionals around you, and when you start surrounding yourself with people who share the credit and share their expertise with you, they are much better than all the free opinions that you're going to read either online or through your friends or through whatever. And this actually is important for you to overcome the fear of asking for help. So there's situations where we actually reached out to consultants and we reached out to people and we paid them money to look at our businesses and to look at how we're dealing with our finances, our legal situations. And some of the best moves that we ever did was to say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Can you please help me? Here is X amount of money. And yeah, lawyers and accountants, those are the two ones that you should really look at in terms of that as well. This one was interesting. So fear of competitors and fear of failure is something that can cause you to look at the people who are building similar ideas to you. And this is something that applies to games especially, and to discredit and to look at people in a way that is spiteful. You need to be really aware of where this comes from as well. And as a business developer, for me, it was out of fear. Like, it was out of looking at other companies who are doing very similar things to us and being spiteful of their work and being happy about their failures or being happy about our triumph over them. And to tackle that fear, you need to celebrate successes, because it's about building an ecosystem and an environment as well. And you'll find that a lot of this thing becomes quite karmic in the sense that it kind of goes around. We've had some of our competitors and people that we've actually conflicted very strongly with, who we've turned around to support over this year, email us and support us when we had really great kind of success stories. And some of them have come from places that I would never have expected previously. And that's because it took a long time for us to overcome this fear of competition and being spiteful as well. This one, I think what we did when we changed company culture and the way that we changed the way that we approached our workplace was that we essentially, and this is a quite personal thing, we had to cut hard. And this happened in personnel, and this happened in the way that we approached, you know, practices and how we pivoted our business and how we actually made decisions along the way. When you kind of have to respond to market conditions, and this can include things like, you know, having an objective look at how the external market is proceeding, or how investors are talking to you, or how people are in your workplace are responding to you, it's better to be decisive than to be indecisive. And this is something that's quite hard, and it's very scary to face this. Some of the most difficult conversations I've ever had have been with people we've let go, or people that like partners, industry partners that we've had to steer away from, or to tell people that we were not going to build things or work on things that they were very passionate about. And we had to do that in a very decisive way. And I think that more often than not, that is better than a no decision, or actually every single time. Yeah, so blame is something that happens a lot in workplaces, and there is a huge fear that comes alongside taking responsibility for things. What's happened with us, especially as a startup and turning into an enterprise, was that there was a lot of highly stressful situations where blame is something that bubbles up to the surface more often than not. I would say that this is something that a lot of you will actually face blaming your colleagues, blaming the market, blaming competitors, blaming, various factors. And I think that comes from a place of fear. And, I hate to say this whole the theme, but there is a ripple effect here in that blame can cause everything else basically to resonate and domino effect as well. And overcoming the fear of taking responsibility for failure is something that we've had to learn, I think, this year, and it's made us all better business developers for it, both employees and myself as well. So because at Opaque we kind of shouldered a lot of the management responsibilities together. Yep. Okay. So I think we're up to questions, but we still have about 14-15 minutes before we kind of have to close it down. So questions, basically. Does anyone have any? Okay, we got one in the back.
Yeah, was there one specific point of data that really crystallized for you that you were going down the right path with realizing that there was a market for astronaut training? Was there a moment?
Yes. And I remember this moment really, really clearly. I typed in Google a bunch of terms that kept getting me to find the articles that I really wanted. And I said, you know what, screw it. And I typed in like virtual reality astronaut training. And I surprisingly found a number of different companies around that had deep dive pools. And then I looked into them, and every single time I clicked on a link, my heart was kind of wrenching. And no one was doing what we wanted to do, basically. And it took about an hour. And that was actually really scary to do. Like, there was a lot of tackling, and I hate saying that over and over again, but I had to really confront that fear full on and then hit those links, look at the companies, do competitor analysis, and actually get objective data points and say, I think my business is viable. And that was really far into kind of when I was working on this. So I was very invested into it at the time. Yeah. Hey?
Like you bearing a huge burden of responsibility. When your fear and stress get too much for you, what do you do? How do you manage it?
Rely on your team. Like, there was a time, for example, that I took like a week off, and I just told my team, like, I don't feel well, I'm taking a week off. And when you have built an entire culture in your office where you've supported people and you've paid them well, or you've had a flexible work time hours, and you've told people, you can take sick days, or if you're feeling a little bit under the weather, take a half day off. And this comes at a huge cost, right? And it's very scary to do that kind of a practice and watch your resources dwindle when you're trying to build a good supportive workplace. When you shoulder that responsibility and you start seeing yourself crumble, that workplace is there to support you back as well. You may find that apprehension to take a break is something that is a fear you have to overcome, and it's quite scary. But if you've been good to the people around you, they're going to be there to support you as well. And maybe some of the most high stress individuals that can't take a break, I would say, that have high crunch workplaces, they're the ones that know that they can't take a break, because that ire is going to just flip around and look at them as well. So it's about the environment that you build and how toxic or supportive it is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah.
How did you find other companies reacted to you wanting to build such a positive culture, if that's what's seemingly the industry standard?
I was just in Los Angeles, and I talked to a lot of tech startups and things about what we're doing. Very supportive, and I think that the culture is starting to shift. It is not viable to build businesses on crunch, and it is not viable to build these businesses on economic models that, if you were to scale up, would just create toxic workplaces. More and more we're seeing stories about tech and games, especially indie companies that are, as they explode into fame, that there's always a backstory of people were not paid, or people were not supported, or people were burnt out and cast out. And it's, the worst thing that can happen is that we fail, right? But we look back on our track record and say, at least we did everything as well as we could have with the people that worked with us. And if people keep emulating that style, great. But yeah, they wish and they hope that we succeed so that we can be a data point for people to look at, as opposed to everyone looking at companies that crunch and hustle and do, be scrappy and everything else like that. They were very supportive, and if they had problems, they didn't really say anything. But it could be different. Like, it just depends. Hey.
So with your whole lenient situation
Funnily enough, like I think right now at the company, the amount of sick days that we have taken collectively, I am like the most significant portion of that, right? We have consistently over-delivered on all of our milestones, and I don't think I've actually seen, like if you were to put Opaque prior to this shift in culture to what it is now, it is more than conclusively different in like 1/10 of the sick days and absences and latenesses. It is surprising how professional people behave when you trust them with the responsibility of managing their own work, turning up to work on time, and just saying, look, hey, you know, how long do you think X is going to take? And then you give them all the freedoms in the world to deliver on X. But when I said, you know, we work 100% of the time, you know, 23.8 something percent of the time, we mean that. You know, it's very rare for someone to turn around and say, I didn't deliver on something. Why? Because I was on Facebook all day. We haven't seen that effect yet, and I anticipate that we will. But I hope to have a workplace that's quite, you know, you have a leadership that's quite supportive and quite positive, so that when we do encounter this, it's not about, you know, a shame circle of saying, boo, shame, you're crap. It's about trying to inspire by leadership, so that everyone on the top is actually behaving in a very positive way. Hey.
So obviously you're talking about empowering your staff and giving them the power to be more than just a cog. What's your operating hours? Because something that I think we should hopefully see in the near future is people scaling back to 4-day work weeks and stuff like that. Like you're saying you start at 10 a.m. Is it Monday to Friday?
Monday to Friday, yeah.
6 to 7 or is it 4?
At 6:30, we can't tell people to get up and go home. Yeah. It can be quite structured in that way, in the sense that, you know, we'll tell everyone, let's go, come on, put the pressure on people to leave. If it turns out that people prefer and work better in a 4-day week, that is something that we would always be open to. We have not had a situation, like, crunch only happens when it's an emergency, right? Or when something breaks, something goes wrong, and that happens in every industry. Like, you know, you can be a car mechanic and the car will explode, and you go, oh, well, I have to crunch a little bit. You know, that sucks. But it's a reaction to things going wrong. And if your mindset is always things are going wrong, so everyone's crunching, that's probably bad. We have flexible hours because we thought that worked better, and it is looking better. And I hope to continue that tradition. We do have core operating hours, and the other thing, exactly. And we do expect that when there's a meeting set and it's agreed upon by all parties, that people just show up on time to that as well. So we do have professional practices, and we treat people as adults, and we hope that they treat their workplace in the same way back as well. Yeah. Sorry, you can yeah.
Follow up on that. Like, how do you think that's going to scale as you get bigger?
Oh, it's going to be scary, right? I would hope that if that type of leadership flows downwards from the very top all the way down, that it continues to replicate itself, or to provide enough people to create a culture that is self-reinforcing as well. I would not like to have a situation where a company was to grow so that we would have, you know, one team that's under crunch at all times and everyone else is having this rosy little paradise. I would like for everyone at every scale to kind of feel like they have to stamp that culture continually forward. And if they don't, then we have to tackle that, you know, head on. And we have to, and that is a scary thing. Like, you know, how do you scale? And I've been asked that like 1,000,000 times in terms of when we're looking at, you know, outside investment, about how we would be able to grow and retain that culture. Yeah. Hey.
You touched upon the relinquishing of control and having trust in others and diffusing that ego a bit. Do you have some more pointers to adjusting the mindset to actually give that, like to actually trust people more with that sort of thing?
You pay people to be there and to work with you, but they're also dedicating their time and their efforts and their skill. One of the worst things that kind of keeps happening is that people believe that when people make sacrifices, that's a form of investment, and it's, you know, skin in the game and everything like that. And I found that to be a really kind of negative way of approaching it, because you're holding people hostage. Stepping back and giving people control is about respecting their skill and their work, and being able to say, maybe you're a better artist than me. Like, what is your background? Okay, so you're looking at a principal engineering and saying, hey, I have this problem, what do you think the solution is? And if they come back to you, and if it sounds a little bit iffy, you need to be able to take a step back and think, all right, like instead of saying, I don't think that this works, being able to sit down and walking through what you think might work, but ultimately giving that person the decision. Opaque Space is not a democracy. It is a very well-informed confederacy of little generals that kind of feed into a very incompetent leader who kind of says, I'm going to trust that person on what they're saying. And that flows on everything from like, the producer to studio management to the artist. Everyone's decision and advice is the informed opinion. But ultimately, the power of that decision rests with you. So you need to be able to be a good leader and take a step back, make an informed decision. And letting go of the ego is where you actually say, all right, I'm going to credit this person with this information and I'm going to follow that decision. And then if they do well and you recognize that, you may find that they continually try and do that for you. Yeah. Okay. Hi.
Hello. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how do you pace growth?
Very difficult. It's we have found that growth right now is based upon not just needs but projected needs as well. So in the company we even have personnel that are responsible for logistics. Pacing growth has been one that's based on available resources, projected resources, as well as risks and projected risks as well. That's been quite difficult, but it's become one that is based on a lot of financial projections. But as I was saying, like looking at what could have killed us previously. So one of the things that we did, for example, was when we hired a producer, it was done at the very end of a project and everyone was really happy and we said, great, that was crap, let's not do that again, let's hire a producer. And then the next thing that happened was the producer was going to be pretty overloaded in terms of logistical support. So we said, great, let's onboard the studio manager. And he came on board and took care of a lot of things around that. So it's about identifying those needs, I think. But we are also looking at scaling up in terms of programmers and artists and things like that. But it'd be very much revenue driven, I think. So financial projections and then risk. Retrospective risk as well. Yeah. Hey.
When you were talking about defensibility, the examples you gave for you were generated from already talking to NASA and already having somewhat of a product.
Yeah.
If you are earlier in the stage and still looking for investment,
yep.
Where do you think I should be looking for those kind of things?
Why are you essential to your idea? Like if you can answer that honestly, then, and this is the best part, if you can't answer it, what do you think you would be able to get in order to make it defensible? So what would make you essential and what would make you the key? And saying that your game idea is great is definitely not the key. Like that's not it, right? It's about maybe you need to go and do all the research and you need to go and put some time into a prototype or construct a business plan or a marketing plan or do the groundwork so that when someone says, why is your idea defensible, you say, I have done all this work behind it. Because we didn't go to NASA, for example, because they had an open day. Like we did a lot of work. We became experts in the field of depicting human spaceflight in virtual reality, to the sense that we were talking with the experts that were building those programs for the previous decades. So getting to that point was a lot of work, but if I was going to pitch to an investor about how I was going to build an astronautical training program before having done those relationships, I would look to pitch how I was going to make my idea defensible and work and internally pitch that and then work towards that as well. And if it's a game, maybe you build a game with a great prototype and then you do a little bit of a social media blast and really get your name out there. Or you build something that someone can say, this is a really novel idea, I like it. And if I give you X amount of money, can you sprint to market basically with it? Yeah. Oh, time? Are we done? Oh, boo. Everyone boo at her. Okay. All right, we're done. All of you go home.